Hey yo, it's your boy Anton Albatross here again with the Cypher Unlimited crew, the usual suspects. So we got Alpha Dean or Dean, and we got Spigs18 or Anthony. And yeah, today we're starting on a very special video advice series. So Dean, what are we doing?
Well, we're going to call this series Before We Hit the Table or Before You Hit the Table. And basically, that's what we're going to talk about, those aspects of before you hit the table. Now, today we're going to actually go over what we call a session zero, but future installments we'll talk about character creation, building connections with those characters, thematic atmosphere, role play versus role play, and that means rolling dice versus actually getting into the narrative, theater of mind versus the grid. These are all different aspects you want to touch upon with this video series. And see if we can give some good advice, and of course, maybe we'll learn something as well. So, Anthony, can you describe a session zero for me?
All right, a session zero is it's what the name kind of implies. It's a session between the GM and the players before they actually really start to play the game. You know, some people call a session zero a job interview for the players and the GM. Th- They get to discuss various topics beforehand, and it's very helpful to discuss all these parameters before you actually decide whether or not you guys want to game together. There's various different ways of doing it. Some people like to, most GMs like to fill out questionnaires and have the players put some answers in and see if they're compatible that way. But we're gonna break it down into five categories just to make it simple for us. The first category we're gonna call the basic parameters of the game, and we'll discuss this as we move forward. Then we'll talk about a social contract. Then we'll follow that up with we'll talk about character building. Then we'll schedule a playtime, and if possible, if the session zero is moving smoothly, we'll discuss possibly talking about doing a quick intro to your game.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff to touch on. So we'll just go right dive right into it with the basic parameters of the game. That entails a bunch of different things, but basically it's seeing how comfortable you are with the GM, with the players, and what you might be comfortable seeing or not seeing in a game. And one of the biggest things to help in that situation is what is normally referred to as an X card. Well, you'll have, each player will have an X card, quote unquote, to play where they feel like a scene is going in a direction they would rather not see. Maybe violence is getting too graphic or something's making them uncomfortable, whatever it may be. The player plays an X card and the GM takes the cue to just move them, take the scene in a different direction, basically. Um, there's a lot of other things that go along with this basic parameters of the game, such as world building. Like how do you want to see your NPCs in the world? Like what kind of NPCs do you find interesting? You could ask your players if you're the GM. For the players, it'd be a chance to say, hey, I would like to see not just NPCs, but maybe we could get on a boat at some point, or little things like that. They might want to see in the game. Um,
I mean, that it's sorry to cut you off, but it's also the time as a player, if you hear the GM is, discussing this massive pirate adventure game, adventuring the seas, and you're really not into that, now is the time to say it. You know, a lot of times the GM will throw an idea out there, and if the players don't necessarily say that they're not interested, he's going to assume that everyone wants to play that style of game. And that's why we have the session zero, right? We have the session zero is for everyone to be out in the open so everyone knows what everyone else is expecting from the game, from the players, and from the GM. And your guys could decide as a group what's the setting going to be like. I've had multiple session zeros where I went in with an initial idea and came out of the session zero with a totally different game than what I originally planned. But that's okay. That's why we have the session zero, is to have those discussions.
Session zero also takes into account a couple of other things because session zero can be the jump off point for you to figure out if you're going to run a campaign, a full campaign. Is it going to be a mini campaign, 4 or 5 parts? um if it's going to have, um, all just all the interesting aspects. Oh, and definitely house ruling. What type of house rules are we going to use in this game? That's so imperative, to get out of the way up front, so you don't have, those odd questions. Session zero is also an excellent jump off point, or an excellent time for the GM to truly state who he is as a GM and what his style is, because some people, truly like, you know, the grids and the heavy system, type game, and they like a lot of, rules as written, they love the raw. Then you have other people, the rules are just guidelines.
We,
And
we have to rewind 1 second, Dean. The first thing you decide in session zero is what system you're playing.
yeah,
We should have named that first.
exactly.
We all cipher guys, so we automatically assume it's cipher system. But for most people, in session zero, the first discussion is hey, are we playing cipher system? Are we playing Fantasy Flight? We playing D&D? We playing Starfinder? What are we playing?
Right. Absolutely. And that, yeah, see, look at that, but he's right. We're all cipher guys. So, right now the default is cipher system,
Yes.
So you are watching CU, it is unlimited. So we apologize, but we really don't. So, with that being said, that just leads us right into the next portion. And Al kind of touched upon it, from the beginning with when he talked about the X card. And that's building a social contract. What is it that we, player and GM, agree upon? You know, and a lot of times it's kind of unspoken because everybody there, is an adult. But you have to decide: are you going to have a G-rated game, a PG-13, R-rated, triple X? Are you okay with, you know profanity? Are you, are there like certain things that, might happen in a game that you're not happy with? Like, we played a game with Anthony with zombies, and we had a player really take, offense to a couple of things. And it was like they didn't want to even say what the problem was. They just kind of, the game was over and they were gone. We found out later.
And that actually falls on me because we should have had that session zero to discuss that. Because
Like,
at the end of the day, you don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable.
right.
And as a player or as a GM, no one wants to feel like they have other people at the table uncomfortable. And with social contracts, what I think of is, which is extremely important as a GM, is discuss what your rules for etiquette are at the session zero. Let people know what you will and will not tolerate at the table. And it's not being heavy handed in any fashion, but it's setting the tone for the way the game is going to be run.
Hmm.
Let people know what your behavior expectations are. Let them know, hey, when we having serious scenes, I would prefer you not to joke around or to go out of character if that's what you want, or I would prefer you not to use curse words. Whatever it is that you feel will make it allow you to provide the most enjoyable and entertaining game as you can as a GM, and as a player, allow the GM to know what's the line that you're willing to cross when it comes to descriptions. Some players don't mind the truly grotesque descriptions of a fight scene or of a death scene. And some players actually take offense to that, and you have to respect them for that, especially if they're telling you in a session zero, hey, this is my line, please don't cross it. And that's what the X card is for.
Exactly. I mean, and I've actually had I've actually had to deal with similar things. Glad you kind of brought that up. Um, I was playing with a group of people who were basically extremely religious people, devout Christian. And, you know, I had to be inventive in the ways I would describe, like, demons and supernatural creatures, because just bringing that stuff up kind of threw certain people off kilter. They didn't necessarily mind being the catalyst to fight against it, but they just didn't like the graphic descriptions. So I had to be very judicious in my descriptive ability to, bring forth these, but I guess, like I said, I wanted to evoke images of horror and, the monstrosity of it and the frightening aspect. But I couldn't just go, this creature, stands before you with multiple breasts. I couldn't describe it that way. I had to, really come up with other ways to do it. So,
And
Anthony brings up an excellent point.
it's helpful when you have those discussions beforehand.
But
Yeah, and
Oh, go ahead.
no, I
Go
was
ahead,
just gonna say, and it doesn't just pertain to like violence or gore or whatever have you. There could be other things that make you uncomfortable. Like one time I was running a one shot with Anthony and some people, I forget who they were at this point, but they wanted to take it in a direction where they were gonna seduce alien women or something like that, and that it's okay if like again that's why even at session 0 you discuss, hey, are you gonna be RPing romantic situations as well. Whereas some other people at the table might be like, no, no, we don't want to deal with all that romantic nonsense, like the touching or whatever, have flirtatious stuff. So let's just skip all that because it makes me uncomfortable. That's again perfectly okay as well. It's just you have to bring it up that's the issue for you. Otherwise, How can anybody know?
Yeah. Another aspect too that someone brought up on our server, and they wanted to touch on modern day games, and they wanted to touch on the oppression of marginalized groups over the course of U.S. history, and this is a subject that would definitely bother me as a player, even if I wasn't part of the marginalized group that he was touching about. It's just I wouldn't see the need to relive bad instances in our history.
yeah, well,
But
basically, when you think about it, it when people want to try to touch on that to put it in a role playing game, you know, especially if you have people who are of that ilk of the marginalized, you're not role playing anymore. This is what we live still.
yeah,
We're still a marginalized people. We still deal with, you know, um, discrimination and outright rudeness and anger. You know, I'm I come from two ethnic groups. Native American and African American or Black or whatever you want to whatever term makes you feel comfortable. But trust me, you know I really don't want to play typical cowboys and Indians and go over the social strata of what was going on at that point. That's not fun. You
and
know.
in the defense of the person that brought it up, because I really don't want to seem like I'm putting out it wasn't coming from that place. It was a question that was asked, and my reply was, you shouldn't be surprised if you brought this up, and you're going to get most people saying that they don't want to participate in something like this. And I
No.
explained to him why I wouldn't. And it wasn't that he was seeing it, he wasn't trying to see it in that person's shoes, but he understood where everyone that replied on the server, where they were coming from. And I really think it wasn't that he wasn't necessarily thinking about it in that way. So, even discussing it a pre session 0 would also be beneficial, because sometimes you have ideas that come out as a GM that'll sound really cool in your head until it's actually spoken aloud to other people, and you realize where the problematic areas can occur,
Well,
and
well,
that was one. You really need a buy-in from a specific group
well, well
that are
that, that
willing to do that.
that's a great point, Anthony, because things do sound great in our head. They sound great as a story.
Mm.
As a story, it's one thing, but then when you have trying to get active participation, it could be something else. I mean, And even goes forward with like a game in of itself. Just like I remember early on, way back in the '90s when Torg, the original Torg, first came out. It probably took me 8 months to find a group of people to buy into it because most people are like, no, I want to play D&D. It's like, why? There's other things besides D&D, but so very good point.
Man,
I was going to say that would lead us into our next stage on the Session Zero, which would be discussing and building characters. I think this is the most important part of the Session Zero because this eliminates, hey, we're playing three paladins and I'm playing the murder hobo, evil assassin. Have those discussions before the game starts. I really don't get privy to do this as much is because I don't necessarily run campaigns as much as I would like. I run a lot of one shots, so I usually come pre-prepared with pre-generated characters. But if you're running a campaign or 3-session arc, this is the most important part of the Session Zero is making sure that all the characters, once you guys decide on a setting, once you guys decide on your table etiquette, once you guys decide on the X card and what kind of game you're going to play, make sure the characters gel and make sure everyone knows what the other person is playing. I couldn't stress it enough how important this is. I've seen so many games die because two people show up with one kind of character and you have someone show up with a character the opposite side of the spectrum, and it changes the whole dynamic of the group. It changes the way the story is run. So that's just my take on that.
Well, and I'll second it because I'll tell you right now, I was actually going to run a mini arc on the server, and I got a ton of response. Oh my God, the response was overwhelming, but the people just didn't want to kind of, I don't think they were catching what I was saying about the game I wanted to run or what the general consensus of a lot of the people were. You had people, wanted to play, crazy hillbilly, brothers who were, kind of goofballs, and stuff. And, you had somebody else, trying to put elements into the game that, weren't really going to work, as a whole. I had people, sending me PMs going, I'm just going to back out. I'm going to quit. I'm not going to do it. If this is going on, it was really kind of a crazy thing. So I ended up just having to, shut the entire thing down and rethink my approach, as far as putting it up, as far as putting out, if I was going to run this adventure. So Anthony makes an excellent point because that aspect is huge. Characters, people don't build the lone wolf character and you're playing in a group of people. The lone wolf character works really good if you're playing in a solo adventure, but when it's a group of, you got 4 people at the table, you guys need to find some commonality to work in. I mean, look at movies. Those are good examples, where you can kind of play, you get your idea of how to bring a group of characters together. You can have a rebel. You can have somebody roguish. You can have somebody who, is not the most socially constructive. Matter of fact, the best example I can think of right now is Guardians of the Galaxy. Look at those characters. They're built along the lines of, you've got Drax, who's a social, he's socially inept. It's but it's really cool. You got Star-Lord, who is the face man. You got Rocket Raccoon, who's a little bit off kilter. He's got a little kind of a twisted sense of humor, but they all come together on a commonality. So those are the things I think you should look at when we talk about, the whole character build aspect.
Yeah, that is a huge point because even again, if you want to make a character like a lone wolf or a character who doesn't really fit in with the group of players that you have, it's important as that one player who's saying, "Hey, I'm going to play the lone wolf." Now that becomes not your full responsibility, but a lot of your responsibility where you're saying, "Hey, why am I with these guys? Like maybe they can help me achieve my final goal. Maybe I won't be as vulnerable if I travel in a group. Whatever kind of way you gotta work your way in there. It's important because again you're playing a group game and you'll be moving forward as a group. So if your goals are always counter to the most of the rest of the party, it's gonna make for some. I'm trying to think of a good word here, but the story won't progress as
Friction.
well. Yeah, it'll be a little
Yeah.
fishy. So that's why it is important. Again, you can play those weird characters. Just figure out a way why you're in a group with these guys and why you want to work together.
Or it could also work the other way. You know, you come up with a weird concept and inspire the other people to create characters similar to yours. Because there isn't no right or wrong answer. You know, sometimes it takes one person to create an idea to spark everyone else's imagination and to scrap what they originally thought and into build a cohesive unit with your original idea. And there is no right or wrong answer. What we're saying is that you should have these discussions beforehand to spark the imagination, to spark the unity amongst as a group, and to allow the GM to see where you utilize all these great ideas that the players have and add it to his narrative. So
Yes.
sometimes you might have the guy come up with a cool, okay, it's a lone wolf, a cool concept, but it'll allow the other players to say, hey, we want this guy to play. And, I know he's not a bad player. I know he really likes this concept. Let's adapt to his idea and we'll tweak our characters, like what you said, Al. And they'll tweak their characters to fit his. And that way there's no surprises, and that's what to me session zero really is to eliminate the surprises, to eliminate the bad feelings that happen when something comes up unexpected. It's about communication between the GM and the players.
That's
And
it in a nutshell. Communication is the paramount portion because you know, like I said, my favorite description of role playing is that it's interactive storytelling. Me as a GM, and I've learned, over the years about, that adaptability, and I'll write a large overview for the story I want to tell, especially when I'm going to run a campaign. I have an end goal idea of what the players are going to go to, for the different story arcs and so forth. But, you know, I do my best to tailor that to the characters, and that's kind of the same thing I'm saying. That's could be part of that social contract. You know, me the GM, I agree to, make your characters the paramount figures in the world of the world we're building, and you as player characters, you promise to, bring your A game and bring, interesting characters together
Mhm.
because it is a social event. Role playing it is a social event, and that interactive storytelling, we can only tell the story if we work together.
And
Go ahead, Al.
just another point with the character creation portion of this is as a GM in the session zero, talking about character creation. I don't really do it much myself, but depending on the setting, the GM might say, "Hey, we're playing a medieval game. Could you not please use the fuses flesh with steel foci, or grows to towering heights foci because it's a medieval game. You guys are just regular people. This is that good time to say, hey, lay down that guideline so
These
that
are the
that
focuses that are
yeah, that are appropriate, or which ones are not appropriate, whichever this might be shorter. And you come to the table and you say, hey, again, going forward when you make your characters, try not to use these like super themed foci because we are playing a medieval game or whatever have you, whatever the case may be. Because again, you don't have without this discussion, a player might come to session one with a you're playing a medieval game, but he
Mm,
figured out, hey, I'll be gross to Towering Heights because I think it would be cool to do that in a medieval setting. He justifies it whatever way, but you as a GM would have been able to avoid that the
mm.
weird discussion like, hey, I don't really think it fits in that session zero where you lay down that line.
Yeah, and it slows the game down, right? If you don't have a session zero, and then you have someone come with a problematic character that you want to adjust. Now that person has to sit there and either come up with a new concept or change, interchange some parts of his character, which eats up into your game time.
Most definitely.
And speaking of game time, that's probably the next thing we should probably talk about.
Yeah, so that segued super well into our next topic, which was scheduling playtime, and that is a crucial thing for role playing games, Cipher, whatever have any kind of game, board games, any kind of events where you're gonna have to be free at the same time. And if you're an avid gamer, you know how difficult that can be sometimes, especially if you're playing online with people from different time zones. And it gets to be quite a hassle, but don't let that hassle stop you from achieving your goal of playing a game. Sometimes scheduling might be one of the biggest hurdles you come across when trying to get a game going, and it could be a little bit discouraging, but don't let it discourage you. Eventually time frames will line up and you will be able to play that game, but it is a crucial part of that session zero where you all get together. You found the time to have the session zero. Now within that session zero you can discuss when would be the next appropriate time to meet for session one.
Yeah. Also, I would say it's very helpful, especially as a GM, is post exactly what you want to run. Be be straight up and honest. A lot of times you see, we gather games a lot from our server. We used to gather a lot from Roll 20. If you're planning an epic campaign, state that at the session zero. You know, a lot of times you'll have someone that's willing to commit to one or two games or three-game arc, but is not willing to commit to every Tuesday for the next year and a half. And if you state that beforehand, you're going to find the players that want to play your type of game with your schedule. And the same as a player. If you see a really cool idea and you show up to a session zero and you know the GM is saying, hey, this is a 6-month arc, we're playing twice a week, 4 hours a day. If you can't commit to that, state it. It's usually never any hard feelings when there's honesty involved.
Facts.
And the other thing I'll point out to people too, especially if you're into the online gaming aspect, that is an awesome way to kind of get your fix. Because no matter what your schedule is, somebody in some time zone, can play with you. I mean, I've actually had a game that I played at, I think I was running a game at, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I started the game at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, my time zone, but I was playing with people overseas and they were, you know, 1 o'clock in the afternoon for them. So it was great. It was perfect. I'm a night crawler. I'm up all night anyway, days I don't have to go to work. So those moments are awesome for scheduling. The other thing about scheduling is, try to be open, try to have at least, 2 or 3 dates and times that you can work within, in order to help people. And, um, even if you're going to run an arc, maybe you can mix it up, mix up days, maybe it doesn't, maybe it won't always be Tuesday, you know, so those things kind of, if you can get some flexibility in there, you get some more variety, you can have a great game.
Most
Um,
definitely.
and Go ahead.
And there's no right or wrong to scheduling. The
Right.
time your availability is your availability, and you shouldn't have anyone down you because you can't make Saturday nights, or you can't do Sunday afternoons. It is what it is. Everyone has a different availability, and sometimes, especially playing online, sometimes time zones suck and games can't happen. and you have to chalk it up to time zones suck and games can't happen, and you move on, and you know figure out, you find a different group. You know, I think a lot of times people get stuck on this idea that, you know, you have to make it work with your first group, or you have to make it work with the people you're playing with, and that there's, you know, friendships end because you can't, you know, if you can't game together, and that's ridiculous. This gaming is about making friends. You know,
Right.
90% of my friends I've met through gaming. Dean is the perfect example. You know, he's like my brother now, and we met through gaming. You know,
Yeah.
and our
Absolutely.
schedules didn't always work, but when it did, hell, we had a good time. When it didn't, yo, I see you next Tuesday. I hope I can get in the next game.
Right.
And,
And that's the beauty of all this, and I think, that's the perfect thing. What Anthony's saying is the perfect segue. As we keep talking about these segues, this is something that is all a part of gaming, finding a way to, meander and so on and so forth. And I'm just thinking about what we were talking about, if possible, with those your session zero. If everything flows right, you might have an extra hour or two. Always have a little something to throw at your players, where they can possibly get to throw a couple of dice, and just test out the flavor of their character, in that moment right after it's made, while it's fresh. It's nothing like an intro adventure, you know and you know no matter what genre you're setting in, you can always go to the default. You find yourselves in a tavern, or you find yourselves in a bar, or whatever. That's always a great default way to get the characters together, to play things out, to shake up the status quo a little bit. And I think everybody's kind of better for it. Get your whistle wet, get you kind of pumped for the next session to come.
I couldn't agree more. It's the best way to work out improv connections between PCs. You know, you do a quick little 30-minute scenario. And I'll give a perfect example. I never really did this to about a year and a half ago, when a friend of ours named James, he was running a traveler horror space game, and we had a session zero. And I was getting ready to log off, and he took everyone's character ideas. We didn't have characters, mind you. We didn't roll them out, but he basically had our concepts. And he said, hey, you want to do a quick session zero, I mean a quick intro? So, and that 30-minute intro, one, it told me what the whole world was about. It told me what the game was about, and it allowed me to play with the other characters. So when we actually sat down to play, I already knew what the other characters' personalities were before we even had character sheets.
Right.
So I'm 100% in agreement with that, and I wish I would have learned that sooner, because I would have done that a lot more.
And believe it or not, the way I learned it
Mhm.
was me and my friends, guys that I grew high school with, and we gamed together. We would do like stupid, just stupid shit. We'd be on the bus and we'd be gaming. You can't roll dice on the freaking metro. You can't roll dice on the train, but we're gaming. We're getting these character ideas and concepts, or we would just be walking down the street, you know, and my buddy Darren, he's out in California now, and I got to get him on the Discord server and get him in the game. You'll love him because he literally sounds like Michael Dorn. You know, yes, and I, my character Kellyanne Shand, it was always great. So you would get into these great discussions, and your character would just be full blown. So that's how I learned it, years ago. And I never realized that's what we were doing. You know, um, get those intros in, get those characters going, man, get those juices flowing. So
I mean, if you had to describe like what's important to one shot to you, what would that be? We rounding out Like, this isn't an in-depth description of what exactly a one shot is, but this is actually opening up a good discussion for our series because we actually going to touch a lot of these topics in further videos. But Al, if you like, what's the importance of a one shot to you?
Do you mean session zero?
Yeah, session zero.
You've been saying one shot.
Yeah, I know. I have a one shot in my mind.
So for the most important thing for
What's the one
me
shot of the session
for
zero?
session zero
Mhm.
would be what we discussed earlier was the social contract kind of aspect of it, or the the basic parameters where you say, hey, you me as a player, I don't want to see X Y and Z. So if we could avoid scenes involving that stuff, you know, please. And again, as a GM, that's important because it lets you know how to flavor your encounters. You might want to avoid certain NPCs interacting in certain ways because you know you have a player who's uncomfortable with it, so you just avoid it. And again, I feel like that's most key and like probably the biggest point for me would be that.
Nice. For me, I could easily say session zero fills in the blanks. It's a fill in the blank for me because, again, like I said, I stopped a long time ago writing out every aspect of the adventure, every corridor, every turn, every up, down, left, right. Stopped doing that years ago because I learned, the old adage, write a great adventure and put your players in it, and they're going to break it. That's all there is to it. And I realized that too, even from running adventures, pre-written adventures. I never run the pre-written adventure, completely the way it's written because players once again break it. So I learned, session zero, what that does is that fills in the blanks of my outline. That adds, I sit there with a notebook, or I have my computer open where I can take notes. Because I get a prime example would be for the unmasked game that I'm running on a server. Did the session zero, knew I was going to have a high school, didn't know what the characters were going to be about, didn't know exactly how I wanted to incorporate, a lot of the social idioms of high school and all of that kind of stuff, especially the 80s, because that's when I went to high school. So very intimate for me. But the players filled in the blanks. You know, I had to have, you know, Sal's mechanic shop. I had to make sure that was there. That was a place that one of the player characters brought with their character background. And little aspects like that, little things that you know, um, Mrs. Van Pelt, the vice principal. I had to come up with a interesting vice principal because the group, comes together. You've got, you know, uh, the pretty tomboy, she's the pretty girl, but she's hidden under a baseball cap and all of that kind of stuff. You've got the handicapped kid who's been homeschooled all the way up to their first year of high school, and now they're going to high school for the first time. You've got the rich kid who's only rich because his mother married a rich guy who wanted a daughter, who wanted a son, but never had a son, only has his daughter, and trying to shape you into something you're not. Great stuff, great, meat, but it gave me the ability to come up with all these other aspects. So we got the video arcade. We put a new mall in, a grand opening of a mall in our first session. Great stuff. But the characters did that, not me, you know. So that's what session zero means to me. It fills in a lot of blanks.
I mean, for me, session zero is basically three things. It boils down to these three things, and if you could grasp these three things, then most of your session zeros would be successful. That's communication, communication, and communication. Basically, that's the whole reason why you have those session zeros is to have an open dialogue. There is no right or wrong answer. Everyone's opinions have value. Everyone's opinions have merit, and when you have a session zero and everyone is open to have these open discussions about what kind of game they want to play, what kind of character, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable, what behavior works and doesn't work at the table, I guarantee you will have a better game for it. Is a session zero mandatory? Absolutely not. You know, I could sit with these two guys right here, right after this video. We could run a game and have a blast without discussing anything. That's what GM Roulette's about.
I was about to say, thanks to GM Roulette.
Speaking
I
of
mean,
which, there is a new one coming.
that's exactly what GM Roulette's about. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when you're sitting down with people that you don't necessarily know, or even if you're sitting down to run a long campaign with people you do know, you know, get everything out in the open because there is once there's no surprises, I guarantee you will have a better game.
Most definitely, fully agree.
And at that, I don't know. I think we've kind of exhausted Session Zero to its fullest. Look forward to the next portion of this. I think we're going to talk about character creation next, which is near and dear to all of our hearts, I think. But thank you, guys. You know, what you going to tell them?
No, just the usual. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. Um, and yeah, it's been a pleasure as usual. Anthony.
On behalf of the CU, we'll see you later. I get to say it, biatch.
This